the Nintendo GameCube. Underappreciated in its time, it has quickly become one of the most beloved systems not only for Nintendo fans, but gamers in general. This purple lunchbox had so much going for it, but for some reason, people weren't interested back then. Maybe it was its kiddie appearance, or maybe it was just because the PS2 was an absolute beast. Who knows? What I do know is that some of the greatest games Nintendo has ever released came out on the GameCube, including my favorite game of all time in Metroid Prime. Not to mention stuff like Wind Waker, F-Zero GX, Chibi Robo, Animal Crossing. The list goes on and on. Like any console though, there are always games that end up never seeing the light of day in certain regions. It doesn't happen as much these days, especially not with first-party titles, but even Nintendo decides to not localize some things from time to time for reasons I don't always understand. And I want to talk about those games, specifically the ones on the GameCube published or developed by Nintendo themselves. Thankfully, we didn't miss out on too many of those games, but the ones we did miss out on were pretty cool. Let's jump right in. First up, we got Nintendo Puzzle Collection. Man, I love these little Japanese GameCube boxes. I love me a good puzzle game. A collection of puzzle games, though? Now, that's just taking it to another level. Nintendo Puzzle Collection may be the most baffling non-release from Nintendo on the GameCube because, well, it would have been so easy. You see, this collection consists of a compilation of what are essentially ports. There's Dr. Mario, which is just Dr. Mario 64, Panel de Pon, which is from an unreleased N64 version of the game, as well as Yoshi's Cookie, which is just Yoshi's Cookie. Yoshi's Cookie is the only game with any real work done to it, as it's gotten a visual overhaul from its NES and Super Nintendo days. Let's talk about the games a little more though. Dr. Mario, or Dr. Mario 64, is a pretty great version of the pill-popping series. There's a full-fledged story mode where you can either play as Mario or Wario, and while it's fairly short, it's a fun way to get acclimated to the Dr. Mario gameplay if you haven't played before. Then there are a few other modes you can play in either single-player or multiplayer. The best part is, multiplayer can be up to 4 players, which is always a blast with puzzle games like this. Visually, it's still an N64 game, so it looks really blurry, but you don't need a lot of visual fidelity here when the sprites from Mario, Wario, and everyone else look this good. Next up is Yoshi's Cookie, and for me it's definitely the weakest game in the bunch. I've never been a huge Yoshi's Cookie fan to begin with, and this one doesn't change much. It's basically just a match 3 puzzle game where you try to clear the board of all the pieces. And by match 3, I mean match 2 or more. They did add a new story mode here, and the visuals look good, but it didn't hold my attention for too long. Panel de Pon, on the other hand, is pretty interesting. Like I said before, this was originally supposed to be released on the N64, but that version got canned. It did, however, get reworked into Pokemon Puzzle League for us here in the West, and if you've played that game, you'll be familiar with some of the modes here. Panel de Pon is a long-running series, and this version added a whole new cast of characters, a new story mode, and up to 4 players for multiplayer. A 3D mode was also added, which, as the name suggests, gives you a full 3D playfield to work with. These games are always a blast. While the games are cool, one of the big selling points for Nintendo Puzzle Collection was its ability to use the GBA link cable to connect the Game Boy Advance. It even came bundled in with a link cable in this big box. You could connect your GBA to download older NES versions of Dr. Mario, Yoshi's Cookie, as well as the Super Famicom version of Panel de Pon. You could also use the Game Boy as a controller if you wanted to. This is a great pickup for the GameCube, especially if you're a fan of puzzle games, and while it's a bit underwhelming that these are mostly just ports, it's still a good time. Let's move on to something a bit different now. Japan loves the rhythm games, and while we did get a couple games in this series, we missed out on one of them. I'm talking about Donkey Konga 3. If you know anything about Donkey Konga, it's that Nintendo released some sweet bongo controllers for it, and these things are so fun. There are 2 inputs, a start button, as well as a microphone which was used to detect clapping, although you could just tap the side of the bongos if you wanted to. While Donkey Konga 3 was the only Donkey Konga game we technically didn't get, I could honestly talk about all 3 Donkey Konga games here because the track lists for all of them are so different. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of licensed pop songs in the Japanese versions, but I obviously don't recognize most of them. And in the US, we got stuff like this.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna
Yep, it's great. I love that Donkey Kong is playing Headstrong by frickin' Trapped in my Nintendo game. What a world we live in. At least we also got Rock Lobster. Anyway, Donkey Konga 3 is pretty neat. It's the same Donkey Konga we know, but this version includes 56 additional tracks, which is pretty huge compared to the previous games. There are 35 songs available from the start, as well as 21 Famicom or NES songs that can also be unlocked. One of the themes from these Donkey Konga games was having some music from Nintendo titles in them, but this was by far the most they added. There are also some J-pop songs, songs from anime, classical stuff, and more. If you're seeing the gameplay and thinking that it kinda looks like Taiko Drum Master, then you're onto something, because these games were developed by Namco, the same devs who made that series as well. Although it's a bit simpler than Taiko Drum Master, Donkey Konga's gameplay can still get plenty challenging, and it really is a blast to play, especially if you can get 4 of these dang bongos and play with friends. Might need to turn up that volume though, because it may be hard to hear everything over the sound of all the claps. Donkey Konga is an awesome series, and if you like the 2 games we got in the West, you have to pick up Donkey Konga 3. There are still some weird songs like Bingo, but you know, you gotta have something for the kids, I guess. The menus are a little difficult to navigate if you can't read Japanese, but there are some handy guides online. And honestly, just go ahead and get the Japanese versions of Donkey Konga and Donkey Konga 2 as well. It's worth it for the new music. I'm gonna have a hard time explaining this next game, but it's one I had a ton of fun with as well. There's really no other games like it out there. Let me tell y'all a little bit about Kururin Squash. Okay, so I have no idea what genre I would describe this game as. Like maybe a maze traversal puzzle game? I don't know, it's so weird and so different, but Kururin Squash is something that I think everyone should try out. You play as Kururin, who is trying to save his family after they've all gone missing, and you do that by traversing these maze-like levels on board your helicopter, ship. I really don't know what this thing is, but it's constantly spinning. You can't stop it. You're spinning forever. You can make your ship spin faster, but that's it. And you gotta be careful too, because you can't hit the walls or else you'll lose some health. There are also some coins to collect along the way if you so please. This all feels like a very arcadey experience, because while you can go through and just try to complete each level as is, the real fun comes in trying to collect all the coins as well as finishing as fast as possible. The levels start out pretty simple with very few obstacles other than the walls themselves, but soon you'll have to manage the direction that you're spinning with some bounce pads, enemies will show up, and the game really starts to get tougher and more varied. It's honestly extremely impressive how much variety is here in what initially seems like such a simple concept. You'll get some boxing gloves for your ship that you can use to punch enemies, boxes, pretty much whatever, and it feels awesome. There's a really nice oomph to it. Then you'll go into some levels where your ship suddenly gets oars and you can dive underwater, which adds even more depth to the experience. At some point you even go on rails and become a flamethrower. Yeah, a damn flamethrower. Kururin Squash constantly surprises. Then there are the boss battles, which utilize all these new mechanics that you learn in each world. The boss designs are so weird and I love them. Although this fish thing kinda scares me a bit. Maybe a lot. This game's definitely got a style that really pops as well. Graphically, it looks very clean with tons of bright colors. You can also unlock skins for your ship, which is a nice touch. This wasn't the only game in the series to come out though. While Kururin Squash stayed in Japan, there was also a Game Boy Advance release called Kururin. That version got released in both Japan and Europe, but in the States we weren't so lucky. Thankfully though, Nintendo released the GBA game on the Wii U Virtual Console, so I would highly suggest people go pick that up. It's just as fun as the GameCube release, and who knows how long those games will stay up on the Wii U. Kururin Squash really would have been an awesome addition to the US GameCube library, but it's well worth playing today, and you don't need to know Japanese to enjoy it. Give this one a try for sure. This last game I'll be talking about is the one that stings the most for me personally. There's a couple different reasons for that, but I'll get into that a bit later. I just wish GiFTPiA got a chance here in the West. I know this wouldn't have sold well here. I understand why Nintendo decided not to bring it over. It makes a lot of sense from a business perspective, but it still makes me sad. GiFTPiA is one of those games that I just fell in love with immediately. It was developed by Skip, the creators of Chibi Robo and Captain Rainbow, the latter of which I talked about in my Forgotten Wii Games video, and this was their first chance to show off what they could really do. I think they hit it out of the park. In GiFTPiA, you play as a boy named Pakal, who slept through his coming-of-age ceremony, which everyone on Nanashi Island has to go through at some point. Missing the ceremony apparently is some kind of treason, so Pakal gets sent immediately to jail. That's some harsh stuff. The game starts off with Pakal in chains and with his face entirely pixelated because, well, I guess he should be so embarrassed that he shouldn't show his face in public. You're tasked with earning 5 million mane, the currency in the game, to pay for this coming-of-age ceremony, and you'll have to pay off a portion of that 5 million so you can lose the ball and chain and the pixelation. That's easy enough to do, and once you do that, then the game really begins. GiFTPiA is very much an adventure-style game with different elements mixed in like survival. You'll have to find items, use those items, eat food so you don't starve, manage your time, and interact with all the characters on the island. And these characters are what makes GiFTPiA so special. Everybody on Nanashi Island is so unique and has so much personality that you can't help but love them. These characters are complex, and eventually each one will get their own sort of side story where they'll give you some tasks and you'll need to help them out. These are very much like the wishes in Captain Rainbow, and the structure is very similar to that game. I mentioned time management, and that's an integral part of GiFTPiA as well. You're still a kid, so you can't stay up too long. You only have a certain amount of time to roam around the island before you get tired and pass out. If you don't get back to your house in time, you'll fall asleep where you are and you'll lose a bunch of money and items. As you play through the game though, you'll gain these gems that you have to fill by helping others. You can offer these at an altar near your home to grow up bit by bit in these trippy dream sequences, and that allows you to explore the island for longer periods of time. This may seem tedious at first, and it can be, but progression is fairly quick and you'll soon be able to spend over 24 hours of in-game time out and about. While you're on your own schedule, all the characters in the game also have their own schedule and do specific things at certain times of the day. This feels a lot like the Majora's Mask NPCs in Clocktown in that regard. Eventually, you will start figuring out secrets about Nanashi Island while talking to certain islanders, and things start getting weirder and weirder than they already have been. And that's the thing about GiFTPiA. It's just such a strange game. There are so many wacky scenarios, and I could talk about them for hours, but I don't want to give too much away. It's also beautiful with cel-shaded visuals that have held up brilliantly over the years. One thing I have to commend as well is the music. While there are a lot of original tracks that are appropriately odd, there are also a lot of licensed tracks from small indie bands from Japan, and it works so well in-game. There's a radio station called Nanashi FM, and every morning as you step out of your house, a random song will play. These range from contemporary rock to techno to just some wild experimental stuff. Here are just a few examples. Some songs feel so out of place, but also feel perfectly fitting at the same time, if that makes sense. I can't give higher praise for how well GiFTPiA handles its music. I mentioned earlier that this one not getting localized stings a lot, and that's because I feel like Skip has gotten the short end of the stick from Nintendo for a long time. GiFTPiA was shown at E3 2003, and while no official announcement was made for the West, after showing it off at a huge trade show like that, it would have been nice to see. Nintendo ultimately said the game was too weird for North American audiences, and a similar fate befell Captain Rainbow. We also never got the third Chibi Robo release here that came out on the DS in Japan, and then, well, Ziplash happened. That has certainly been well documented. And now, Skip seems to be no more. Their website has been down for a while, and there's a lot of evidence pointing to their studio being shuttered. I can't help but think Nintendo held them back. It's super unfortunate. While most of the games I've talked about haven't needed much Japanese language knowledge to play, GiFTPiA is very different. It has a ton of text, as would be expected from an adventure game. There's no official translation, but a team over at the site Kirameki has created a fantastic translation guide that you can use alongside the game to get through it, and that's what I used. It's not a full translation of every interaction, but it will help you play through the story, and honestly, I think that's all you really need. GiFTPiA is not something that everyone will enjoy, but please, please find a way to play it if any of this sounds interesting to you. The GameCube was such a great system with so many experimental games. While there were a couple other Nintendo titles that were only released in Japan, like a pretty generic golf game as well as like a Zelda quiz thing that used the GameCube microphone, I didn't think those were worth talking about too much. Either way, I hope you learned a little something, and I hope you get a chance to go turn on that GameCube again. Now, I'm gonna go play some Metroid Prime and sulk about Metroid Prime 4.